Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Owen. Happy to be here.
You have done many different things over your career as a journalist and writer, including penning the book, The Chairman's Lounge, which is already receiving a significant amount of reviews. I can see in Amazon and everywhere else that the book is accessed. So kudos to that, mate.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about Qantas. We're going to talk about corporate governance. We're going to talk about a whole range of different issues. But I can't think of anyone in Australia that strikes fear into business leaders and CEOs and all those people that you see on those lists other than you. I was thinking about this. I was trying to think about all the regulators combined. Wonder if that would be a measure of your impact. But I guess we'll see, and we'll leave it up to listeners to make that assessment today.
Yeah,
as well.
I mean, I don't think I wield the kind of power that Gina Cass-Gottlieb does, but yeah, look, you do your bit to keep people accountable. And the thing is, regulators help journalists and journalists help regulators, not in a collusive sense, but we're all sort of trying to achieve the same objectives, and we ultimately can't really help but feed off each other's work.
I was curious, as like a point to jump into this conversation in your career, is if there was a moment or a story or something you did where you realized what you were doing is like you found your thing, your place in journalism and in the business, I guess, readership in particular. If there was a moment in time where you thought to yourself, like, this is having an impact and I am doing something that's quite unique in this landscape.
Yeah, I suppose probably when I upended the CPA Australia organisation and had Alex Malley fired as CEO in 2017. That was a moment where I think I had been campaigning against, poor governance and disclosures of public companies already. And Murray Goulburn, the dairy company, was a big one of those, and that had a big impact, including the CEO being struck off from managing companies. And vocation was another one in the education sector, a listed roll-up where the CEO was struck off from managing companies, and the chairman also had some issues with regulators. So, it's not like it was a brand new thing, but I think the Alex Malley story was where it really captured some more widespread attention. And certainly the point at which I felt, wow, I'm doing something really worthwhile here, because, writing a column about who's having lunch with who at Rockpool, have to say it has limited sort of, you don't really get excited to go home and tell grandma that's what you do for a living. But you do get a sense of some sort of public service in getting companies that are ripping off its members, organisations like CPA that are ripping off its members, or companies that are doing the wrong thing by customers or shareholders or staff. That's something that you can really feel good about doing. So yeah, probably at about that point, and it gave me a great model of campaigning as well. That was the first time I'd ever combined with a round reporter at the AFR. In that case, it was a young Ed Tadros, who was the new accounting reporter, and him and I, he would write the news stories on the front of the paper. I would write the columns on the back page of the paper, and between us we would squeeze CPA until the pressure was unbearable for them. And I did that with our mining reporter on Rio Tinto. I did that one out with our aviation reporter on Qantas, and in a circular way, I finished off doing that on PwC in the tax leak scandal with Ed Tadros again, and with Neil Chenoweth. So that was a model that was established to cooperation with my colleagues that was really rewarding to execute.
So before the AFR, you worked in corporate communications, and maybe for people that have no idea what that means, can you tell us what that means? Because I think it kind of does, I guess, illustrate some of the things that maybe people don't really understand about business and the way, I don't know, politicians and the business elite, quote unquote, interact with each other and industry. Can you talk to us about that time of your life and ultimately maybe why you shifted across?
Well, I mean, corporate affairs in a company is just a fancy, it's almost a euphemism for the PR department and the lobbying department. So they manage the relationships with the media and with politicians and and public servants. So I did that having worked in politics. I worked as a staffer for Bruce Baird, who was a federal Liberal MP, and then for Joe Hockey, who was a minister in the Howard government. And when the Howard government quite deservedly lost the 2007 election, I was still in my mid-20s, and I got a job in the Qantas comms department. And yeah, I mean, it's professional spin doctoring. It's taking the company's perspective and propagating it, no matter how cynically no matter how cynical the tactics required to do so. I guess the great thing about working in politics and then corporate spin doctoring before becoming a journalist, which is the reverse order of how most people do their careers. They start out as journalists and then they go to the dark side. The benefit of doing it in that order, in that unusual order, is that when I got to journalism, I knew all the tricks of the trade. So I was highly suspicious of every word that fell from the lips of the CEO, of every adverb in every trading update, because I myself had, on countless occasions, described Hail Mary transactions as earnings accretive, plunging earnings as encouraging on an underlying basis, and the quite conspicuous backings of executives as their honest desire to spend more time with their family and more time with their family. So, I spoke the language of the PR industry. I was highly attuned to their bullshit, which made it very hard for them to bullshit me as a journalist. And I think I brought that ability out as a. I think that served the readers of the AFR very well. I was like the father of daughters who could see the new boyfriend coming a mile away.
I love that. So one of the I guess, I don't know if you call it, it was a little bit scandalous. Billionaire Jerry Harvey, founder of Harvey Norman, which has been in the spotlight for many different reasons, whether it's accounting or characters, shall we say. The time you were at the AFR, they were an advertiser, I assume, on the media assets across the network. And Jerry said something about you, which has gone down in history as one of the great quotes, I guess, about you. And I've heard you asked about this a couple of times, which is he called for you to be stripped and flogged, which I'd never heard before.
And hung.
And hung.
He obviously meant hanged. But let's not be too particular about the grammar. Yeah, so he wanted me executed in the town square.
So I guess there's a few questions that fall out of this. The first is what did you do?
Well, I laughed.
What did you do to get him to that point?
Sorry. I thought you. Yeah, now I understand the question better. Look, I've been writing a series of articles about the very poor disclosures, the dodgy accounting of Harvey Norman. At the time, in particular, it was all around the losses of franchisees. So a very large number of Harvey Norman franchisees, and they're really not franchisees, and I'll explain that in a second if you wish, but a large number of these so-called franchisees went broke every year and disappeared from the network, from the Harvey Norman network, and they were sort of taken out the back and shot, but they were never required to repay any of what they owed to the parent company. So effectively, Harvey Norman was forgiving these losses, which meant it was not a genuine franchisee relationship. The only reason why they were called franchisees, I mean, just so you know, these so-called franchisees had their bank accounts swept every night by Harvey Norman, the parent company. They had their rent was set, their marketing was that prices were all set. They had no effective control over their so-called franchises. They were employees of Harvey Norman in name only. And the only reason why the accounts pretended that they were franchisees instead of employees was so that Jerry didn't have to pay payroll tax. I mean, it's just a massive payroll tax dodge that's been going on since Harvey Norman was pretty much since they set this system up in the 80s. And look, by the way, good on them, very innovative accounting. But I was well within my rights to point out how much of a joke it was, particularly when they're supposed to be franchisees, but you don't make them pay back what they owe you at the end. You just make it all disappear. And the losses sort of never fall below the line. So I wrote about that at length, and Jerry took great exception to that. And there's lots of things that they do with their accounts that are pretty ordinary, if you ask me. And I think that's why Harvey Norman trades at a discount, because it's basically a governance discount, because people can't really be confident in the health of the company. I'm not really suggesting Harvey Norman's about to go broke or anything, but how real are its earnings, and how real, in particular, how real are the assets on its balance sheet? They don't audit. The auditor doesn't value all of the properties every year. They do a very limited sample on a rolling basis. So we're supposed to say, everyone assumes that the properties on the balance sheet of a company with large property holdings are audited. Well, it's not really right to say that Harvey Norman's are. So understandably, when you try to value the company, you don't know what its assets are really. You're going to apply a discount to that risk if you're a shareholder. And so when he complains constantly that, the share price is so low, it's stupid. Sell your house, sell your car, sell your boat, buy Harvey Norman shares. I'm quite entitled to have a laugh at that and point out why people are not buying Harvey Norman shares. But look, it was fun. He was a very fun, counterparty in this dispute, because he's very funny. He's a bit mad. We'll say crazy things. So look, I didn't take it personally, and I hope he didn't take it personally either.
Do you ever, okay, he's a bit fun and you can maybe have a bit of a laugh with him about certain things, but did you ever or do you ever take a backward step, for reasons for professional reasons, for financial reasons, legal reasons, even maybe, I don't know, like, not to suggest this in any way to do with Harvey Norman or Jerry, but, personal safety, like you're dealing with high profile people, high profile businesses that have a lot to lose when you come out with something.
Yeah, sure, but that's why this is a great country. And if I was doing this in the United States, where there's every second person seems to have a gun, or put it this way, I would have disappeared a long time ago if I was trying to do this in Russia. So that's what makes this a great country. I've never felt at personal risk. Many of my colleagues in journalism have been at personal risk, and I salute their bravery. I won't, for security reasons, I won't actually name them, but that's never really been an issue for me. Touch wood, maybe, I hope that remains the case, but that's never been a reason to take a backward step. I take a backward step when I come to accept that I'm wrong, and certainly if I get something wrong, if I misstate facts. I'm pretty quick to put my hand up and correct and apologize if necessary. So I'm not too proud to do that, and I think that's not done enough in journalism. We're so fixated, especially in this sort of post-Trump era where we're all supposed to. Well, it's not post-Trump anymore, but you know what I mean. In this Trump era where it's considered a weakness to admit that you're wrong. I really don't agree with that. I think in journalism, it's a strength to admit that you're wrong, because if you always admit when you're wrong, then your readers can trust that when you don't admit that you're wrong, that you're right. I mean, that helps. People can have greater confidence in the veracity of your work. So yeah, that's that. But look, if I'm charging in at a target on something where I'm sure of the facts, and they're wriggling on the hook as it goes, then I'm certainly not going to back down.
Speaking of wriggling on the hook, I think really good journalists, I think they would be better investors than basically 99% of professional investors, so to speak, because
there's some great professional investors who have been journalists. I mean, John Sevior was a journalist at The Age, and he's one of the great Aussie equities managers of the last generation.
Yeah, We had a John Addis, if you know him, founder of Intelligent Investor, on the show
Right.
recently.
Yeah.
Wonderful writer. Probably wouldn't call himself necessarily a quote unquote journalist, but maybe just a writer, and wonderful investor. Like so many great people that have passed through. But it's more that wriggling on the hook idea that you just gave us. I was curious, and I asked Rachel from the Australian Shareholders Association to give me a couple of questions to ask you, and she was really interested in the way you go about your research and that kind of process, particularly if you had like tight deadlines or things that you were working to. Like, where does it start, and like how do you determine if something is wriggling on the hook and you've got something here? What does that look like for you, or what did it look like?
Well, when companies come out and sort of start attacking you, you know that you're on the right track. Or indeed when prime ministers start attacking you as opposed to addressing the substance of what you've written, you know you've got them, in a hopeless situation where they can't actually address that. And to be honest, Murray Goulburn was the first time that ever happened, and I can remember it being a huge shock to me. They issued a statement. The company issued a statement sort of saying, "Oh, my facts are all wrong, and it's a series of incorrect articles," without actually saying what was wrong or incorrect about them. And my editor was sort of came up and said, "Yeah, pointed all of that out." Said, "Well, if they sort of listed the factual inaccuracies, then sure, we'd be in strife. But they claim that it's riddled with errors, but they won't actually inventory them. So that's always a good sign. But maybe I need more specificity from you about what the question is. Is it
Yeah.
like how I would go about?
Yeah. So say, for example, in the Murray Goulburn example, maybe if you can tell us, like, what was like that initial kind of seed in your mind that was planted that was like, hang on, there could be something here. And then
Yeah.
what follows that? Like, how do you then go and interrogate that idea?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm looking for. It sort of depends. There's multiple different types of stories. A lot of the time, it's based on the numbers, and companies, they're like their PR departments. They have investor relations departments, and they prosecute implausible numbers. They say we're going to open. I remember Domino's was a favorite target of mine. Domino's was going to open 7,000 stores by 2030 or whatever, 2035, whatever the year was. And those numbers were just completely make believe. And so you base it, you sort of, okay, let's unpick that. How many stores would they have to open per year? How many stores do they have now? Where, isn't it a saturated market in Australia and New Zealand already? So basically, they've just got to go and buy new territories. Where are these territories? Well, they've just bought Italy. They reckon they can sell pizza to the Italians. So you sort of go into it like that and you go, this is a narrative, a corporate narrative that just doesn't hold water. And, Don Mage, of course, has just stood down, or is going to stand down from Domino's, having failed abysmally to get anywhere near those store targets. And having said that, though, the share price went to the moon after I pointed out all of this stuff and then came back down again. So I try not to worry too much anymore. I might have worried back then, but I try not to worry too much anymore whether or not what I say about a company is right in the short term in terms of its share price. I mean, I was pointing out all of the problems really inherent in the Afterpay model. And no matter what I wrote, the share price just kept going. I mean, I remember it went from $30 to $150 in about 6 months, and the whole thing had hairs on it. Having said that, I have huge respect for the founders of Afterpay and what they achieved, but clearly it was a let's flick this before everyone realizes that it doesn't really do much. And you can be wrong on the scoreboard if your scoreboard is, the profit opportunity for investors. But as a journalist, that's sort of not my point. And you're right. The truth wins out in the end when the thing comes to pass, even if, a transaction has occurred. Like Afterpay is now in the books of Square, or what's now called Block, at virtually nothing. It's virtually a worthless company that Square paid $30 billion for. And Domino's is, okay, it went to $150 a share. Well, now it's back in, $50 territory. So in the end, it wins out. But then the other type of story, which I think became the greatest signal for a scandal, was the behavior of the CEO or the board. And particularly, I became fascinated by CEOs starting to lose their perspective and their judgment, and frankly, saying objectively crazy things. And that, for me, if I could spot a highly regarded CEO or founder of a company saying things that just did not make sense, then I knew that there was going to be more. If I opened the bonnet on that company, I was going to find a lot of great material, and that's what happened with Hamish Douglas at Magellan, when in December 2021, he said, bearing in mind that his major global fund was trailing the MSCI World Index, which is their benchmark target, by 2,000 basis points, so 20% for the year. And he claimed in an interview that he had not had a single investor question the performance of that fund. Which was just like saying the sun sets in the east. It was just not possible. So that's when I started on looking into that. And that whole Magellan fell apart within 3 months. And then Qantas was another example where Alan Joyce, who was sort of considered one of Australia's great CEOs, in 2022, first when Qantas was falling to pieces operationally, he said that it was because passengers were not match fit, which was mad. And then 3 months later, after Qantas' operations were even worse, and the Australian dared ask him about that and why he'd been on holiday during that sort of meltdown, he said, "Well, I'm not a public figure, and what I do in my own time is nobody's business." And so, for a CEO of Qantas, a public company with 150,000 mum and dad shareholders, with public positions on tax policy, industrial relations policy, marriage equality, so on and so forth, to say that he's not a public figure after 15 years. By the way, he grounded the whole nation in 2011. That's when you start to go, oh, hang on, there's a lot more to this. So that's sort of the two different ways that I've stumbled into big stories.
It's interesting about the pattern recognition there, and that as a signal, the founders' narratives are so important to you as a journalist, and then you can pad that out through your due diligence and so forth. So you've just come out with your book, The Chairman's Lounge, which talks at length about Qantas. I feel like you could have written a book on almost any of your characters and targets over the years, mate. But this one in particular is so, I guess, tangible for Australians that go through an airport or just see it in the sky. This infrastructure asset that we have. And I mean, you've alluded to it already, but, without giving away all the secret sauce that's in the book, I'd love for you to just give us kind of the bird's eye view. You probably heard that one before. The bird's eye view of like why you took aim at Qantas, which you've just kind of alluded to, and then what the process was that followed.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've pointed out what got me onto them in the first place. And then so I started to dig, and it became apparent to me that Qantas had sort of been operating in many ways like a private equity player, more so than a regular public company for some time. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a really capital-intensive type of company, and Qantas is the worst kind of capital-intensive company. If you invest in a REIT, it's very capital-intensive, but of course they're investing in appreciating assets. Qantas spends billions of dollars to buy depreciating assets, aircraft mostly, and what Qantas had been doing is just not buying aircraft. They'd been massively reducing the amount they spend each year on planes. It was about 2.5 to 3 billion a year when I worked there, and by the time sort of 2016, 17, 18, 19 comes around, it's half that. And that's the difference between really profitability and not profitability. I mean, at least they were making profits of $1 billion, $1.5 billion before COVID. And unsurprisingly, Alan Joyce inherited a fleet that was on average 8 years old. And by the time he left, it was about 15 or 16 years old. So he allowed the fleet to double effectively by disinvesting in the company, which is what private equity does, really. So I started writing about that, and I started, again, Alan Joyce continued to make statements that were just sounded crazy because his judgment had become impaired by being in that powerful position for such a long time. Just the same as many other leaders do. And Qantas chose to sort of attack me, to then attack the AFR, to try and shut me down, rather than engage with me, to complain about me to my boss, to my boss's boss, and then my boss's boss's boss, and my boss's 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 boss. Did I add a boss there? Anyway, you get the point. It was a lot of layers of complaint. And so obviously that just makes you absolutely certain that you're on a winner. But having said that, I mean, people are absolutely entitled to complain about the journalism about them. I'm not saying that they're not. But again, Qantas was not able to outline any actual factual errors in what I was saying. Or what they were saying was that they disagreed with my conclusions that I reached using the facts that were not in dispute. And that's not how. That's sort of not within their rights to change. So that was also a good signal culturally that the company had lost the plot.
How did you? So for people that aren't familiar, I think you've made it quite familiar already. But for people that haven't heard or read you before, the book's called The Chairman's Lounge, and there's an AFR post about what exactly is the Chairman's Lounge. Can you explain it for folks and maybe the connection to the kind of the political elite or like the business elite and what that association was?
Yeah, sure. So the Chairman's Lounge is the name of a network of lounges, of domestic airport lounges in Australia that Qantas operates in every mainland capital city and in Canberra. And it's an invite-only club. So it's both a place and a tier, an invisible tier at the very top of the Qantas frequent flyer program. And so you can't just fly there. You can't fly Qantas, more than anyone else and get invited. It's for powerful people. It's for the CEOs of major companies and the chairman of major companies and politicians and regulators. And there's about 5,000 people who are primary members, and that's basically the elite of Australia. And there's no other airline in the world that other than Virgin Australia. Outside Australia, there's no other sort of network like this. The British Airways, the US carriers, they all have these invite-only tiers to their frequent flyer program, but you can only be invited to join. But they don't have dedicated lounges for those members. It's a very Australian thing. And you go into they've got an unmarked black door. You go in, luxury furniture. It's got a full restaurant with you can order whatever you want for free. Premium wines and spirits, unlimited. And then when your flight is boarding, a staff attendant comes over and tells you personally that it's time to board. It's very nice if you're in there. People get quite attached to it, and also what it means is that they give you lots of free upgrades if you're traveling. You're in economy? Oh, don't worry, we've moved you to business. You're in business class on an international flight? Don't worry, we've moved you to first class. And so this is a very quiet system by which Qantas has wielded influence over the elite classes of Australia for 40 years. And in particular, the political class, because every member of federal parliament is a member of the Chairman's Lounge, plus their spouses. And in Anthony Albanese's case, his spouse and his son, which he has now finally admitted to after refusing to discuss or confirm last year when I wrote about that in the AFR. So, in circumstances where it is the Australian politician's job to regulate Qantas, to keep it in line and to make sure that it's providing a safe and reliable service to Australians at reasonable prices, politicians completely failed to do that in coming out of COVID. And Qantas really sort of betrayed Australia in COVID by profiteering and sacking people illegally and sucking down subsidies while it was refusing to, making it impossible for its customers to use COVID credits when they're actually entitled to refunds. There's a whole catalogue of wrongdoing that is in there, and the political class of Australia did nothing. They seem to have no idea because they're the last to realise that there's anything going wrong, because they don't have to wait 11 hours on the phone to get through to a Qantas call centre agent, and when their bag goes missing, they don't have to wait for days for anyone to even contact them, or they don't find it impossible to use a COVID credit. They call the chairman's lounge number and all of their problems are fixed in an instant. So, this is sort of the problem. Qantas is supposed to be the national carrier, but it's got all of Australia's most powerful people in its pocket. And that allows it to do the wrong thing by the rest of Australia.
I want you to focus, I don't know if you are willing to do this, but one of the questions I had for you was that imagine all you care about is the Qantas share price. Do you think that initiative, shall we call it, is good for Qantas as a business?
The chairman's lounge?
Yeah.
Oh, it's terrific. Absolutely. As a shareholder, I'd want that system to stay in place forever. And by the way, all of Qantas's top shareholders are also members of the chairman's lounge. Don't you worry about that. So Qantas knows how to influence everybody. Even shareholders of Qantas would think twice before selling their shares, because does that mean they get kicked out of the chairman's lounge? It's an amazing system, and I give Qantas full credit for developing it. But soft corruption, which is really what this is still, a blight on the economy, because what it does is it creates rent seeking. And Qantas is able to rent seek. It leads to price distortions and a lack of competition. So, from an economic perspective, it's very bad for Australia. But yeah, for for shareholders of Qantas, it's absolutely brilliant.
I know you know this, but Virgin and Qatar, if I'm not mistaken, announced a kind of alliance, which was pretty significant in the scheme of things as well, from where I sit. I'm curious, obviously, I see that, and I see some of the work that you've done. Obviously, Virgin's its own basket case as a business for sure, but I'd wondered in preparing for today if you think that as a result of the work you've done and the social pressure and everything, I wondered if you think that we would maybe finally see some positive change in that regard.
For
consumers.
Depends what you mean by positive change. I mean, look, Qantas, and the reason this all became, the Qantas stuff came to head, and the chairman's lounge and the influence of Qantas over Canberra came to a head, was because Anthony Albanese's government, inexplicably, genuinely, without any plausible reason, blocked Qatar from increasing its flights to Australia last year. They gave all sorts of ridiculous excuses for rejecting it, but none of them held water. I won't bore you with the details of them, but none of them held water at all. And so that led to higher prices. Qantas already dominates the international market to Europe because it's allowed to be in a partnership, not just a partnership with Emirates, but in a joint venture. So they even set their pricing together, and they set their schedules together, and they effectively operate as a joint business between Australia, Europe, and the UK and the Middle East. So, and they have 52% market share between Australia and the UK. I mean, the idea that you would let two players cooperate and control 52% of the market, that would be like if you said ANZ and the NAB could merge their branches, or Coles and Aldi could merge their logistics centres. It would just never be allowed, and yet the ACCC allows it. And don't ask me how they defend that. But my point being, so Qatar's rejected last year. It leads to sky-high international prices. Well, they already were sky-high, but leads to higher prices for longer for Australian travellers. And so what Qatar has done is taken an equity position in Virgin, 25%, and done a wet lease deal with Virgin. So instead of them being Qatar flights, which the Albanese government has blocked, they will be Qatar planes and Qatar crew, but they'll actually be called Virgin flights. So it's sort of it's just a tricky workaround of the government's decision. And because the government, got so much heat over the decision, I suppose they're gambling that the government wouldn't dare block their second attempt. But, Qantas quite rightly says, well, hang on, Virgin's outsourcing its international network. There's no Australian jobs in this. Why should we be competing with Virgin, so-called Virgin flights that have crew that are paid half the amount that our crew are paid? But of course, again, with Qantas, as always, they find it difficult to see the full picture. Qantas has been outsourcing its crew overseas for years. If you fly to the UK on Qantas, the crew are living in London. If you fly to New York on Qantas, the crew are all Kiwis. If you fly to New Zealand on Qantas, not only are the cabin crew all Kiwis, all the pilots are Kiwis as well. So yeah, like Qantas is just spectacularly good at poking holes in their competitors and their rivals, while actually practicing massive hypocrisy. Now, don't get me wrong. You don't want Virgin to be able to just let Qatar operate its network overseas forever. But the only reason that they're having to do this is because the Albanese government made a completely indefensible decision. I mean, that's why it's happening.
Mm. For the book, I heard you previously say that obviously you spoke to so many different people, like current and former members of Qantas and industry and so on and so forth. My question is around that for the book, but also just in general, how you go about finding the people who know things, but for whatever reason don't want to be named in your stories in the book. And then how do you cultivate those relationships? And feel free to just use it as an example of a question that's like, how did you piece together the mosaic that went into writing the book?
Oh, look, there's no particular order about it. You just start from the beginning and you call lots of people and you pick, one person tells you something and suggests that actually you should talk to that person. And it all happens quite iteratively. We just build sort of a bigger picture by just working the phones. It had the advantage of I'd already written about this for more than a year in the newspaper, so I'd already spoken to a lot of people about it as I went. And because it was in the newspaper, people were contacting me throughout that process. So lots of current and former Qantas executives were filling my inbox when I was at the AFR saying, yeah, okay, that's what you said is right, but what you should look at this part. That's what you've missed. And so that had already pre-filled a very large part of the picture for me. And look, inevitably, when you're writing about the most powerful company in Australia with incredible inducements at its disposal, and top relationships and leaders they can pull against you, very few people are going to have are going to be prepared to put their name to things, and that's unfortunate, but that's just journalism. If you can double source and triple source things based on off the record interviews, then that's still information that you can use any day of the week. So,
how do you avoid or at least mitigate bias in your work, Joe? Because I know from being on the investor side of the fence and speaking with a lot of fund managers and CEOs, founders, if anyone basically other than you at the AFR was to write a story about them, they'd give each other a crisp high five and they'd be like, this is great. And there's PR agencies, corporate communication, all this stuff, right? These people that just try and influence you constantly are trying to say, not you, of course, but literally everyone else.
Sure, but that's how society operates. That's how the market operates. Everyone's incentives are to pump up, to sell whatever it is they're selling. Sell their story, sell their stock, sell their advertising inventory or their sales inventory or whatever it happens to be. I was sort of one of those rare. So the market is everyone's incentives generally in the market are to push the price of everything up. That's a bit like the housing market in that regard. But I was sort of one of those rare things. My incentives were not to push the price of anything down, like a short seller. But my incentive was to entertain my readers and to inform them. And so in a world of just unbelievable spin and rubbish that's floating around the market, I didn't have the same incentives as other people. And I didn't have to maintain relationships. Like if I'm the mining reporter or the banking reporter, there's a certain limit to how far you can push things by pulling apart the companies that you write about, because you do have to have some, half decent relationships with people in order to get access to information. I could really come in there, and just with a scorched earth approach and not really have to worry, because once I'd blown up my relationship with with this particular bank, I'd be over here 5 minutes later writing about the infrastructure or more mining industry, so it wouldn't matter as much. So you had that greater freedom, but bias is there was bias in my work. There's bias in everyone's work. There's no such thing, really. I think we all now understand as objective truth. Well, maybe that's debatable, but like I was writing commentary, and it was obviously my perspective on, they're based on facts, but my commentary was rendered from facts, but it was ultimately my conclusions. And you were, by the way, free to not agree with me. And I was totally cool about people not agreeing with me. And particularly in investment market where you can have two very, very smart people who have exactly the opposite opinion of a stock. Inevitably, you're not going to please everyone. And part of the job was sort of understanding who to believe, whose views to respect more than others. It's hard. It's a hard. That's sort of in some ways one of the hardest parts of the job.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So you knowing who to believe, like indexing one source over another, would that be in a sense like knowing their incentives? So obviously, now we know what yours was to entertain and to provide commentary. And is that an example of like, the Charlie Munger quote, "Show me where I'm going to die and I won't go there," the late Charlie Munger, I should say. Is that an example of like you have all these characters walk up to you and this guy's invested in that and she's running that organization and works here, and then you're like, well, the first thing I'd know is like, what do they get out of it? Is that kind of like a first base for you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to understand people's perspective, people's what dog they've got in this fight, and that's one of the very first questions I ask anyone when they tell me something. I say, "So, where are you in this whole thing? Like, are you long? Are you short? Are you, kissed off because of something that happened? Can I please know about that?" So and by the way, just because someone is embittered by their being coming out off the wrong side of a deal, or being short a stock, or generally disliking a person who's behaving badly, does not mean that information is not very valuable and that it shouldn't be used. It's just that you have to, as you say, weight adjust the information to account for that. You're probably not going to write a massive takedown of one individual based on someone's information because they beat them to a job, or all of that's got to be factored in. But at the same time, like, wrongdoing is wrongdoing, and you've got to find out about it somehow. And it doesn't mean just because a fund, for instance, is positioned to profit from the stock fall, it doesn't mean that what they've uncovered isn't correct. So yeah, all of that has to be taken into account. And by the way, I'll put my hand up and say I was much better at that at the end than I was at the beginning. So that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's pattern recognition, I guess, that you get from doing the 10,000 hours cliche. So would you ever have instances, like, there's a question about character I think that's really important here, is like, if I may, you kind of carry yourself in a way where you are aware of all these things. You've been doing it for a long time. You had that experience in corporate communications and so on and so forth. Would people generally know that you're someone who is, if you tell me something, it doesn't mean shit, really. I'm going to analyze it on my own terms. And the kind of the way you conduct yourself, people know to think that way? I guess it's a really butchered question, but I'm kind of just trying to get at like the way you would carry yourself and the way you would communicate with people was such that, yeah, you might have told, Joe Bloggs over in the mining department something like this, but I over here, I'm independent of that, and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think having direct style of communication is really helpful in a conflict situation. And a lot of people, when they took my call, they immediately assumed that they were in a conflict situation, because I wrote a lot of negative things about companies. Now that wasn't always, but I always try to give people a fair hearing and hear their side of things. If I thought that they had a valid side of things, I mean, some people will complain that he's not interested in my point of view. I mean, but if you've just sort of some people have an indefensible position as well. You've got to remember that.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. It's for other people to say, how did I carry myself? Did I do it appropriately? Was I fair? I tried to be. was another thing that I got much better at as time went by. I started off as quite a conflict averse person. I found it quite, terrifying having fights with people and not even having fights with people, just telling them that, calling someone up and saying, I think you're full of shit and tell me why I shouldn't think that. That's not a socially natural task in life. We're not really conditioned to do that. So that was a real challenge to get better at that. And, sometimes I have bad days. I'm not as good as that as I am on other days. But yeah, all you do is try and learn as you go.
I've got two more quick questions for you, Joe. One is more of a philosophical one, and it's in relation to a comment that you made earlier on. It's like kind of when people lose context and lose that kind of reality, there's like a distortion in their brain when they have power for so long. The question I was going to ask you is, like, do you think that kind of power, that kind of authority, that influence is related to that kind of outcome? As in, can't we have people that have that position but also don't abuse it?
Yeah, I think, some people are more predisposed to power abuse than others. I think I would almost go as far to say most people are predisposed to get carried away with power. It's sort of the minority who can handle it over time, but everyone gets affected by it in some ways. And this isn't just my, bush psychology. This is genuinely a field of study that's been peer reviewed and lab tested for 30 years in the United States. And power affects powerful people in very similar ways to traumatic brain injury. And it's progressive, so that the longer you are in a very high status position, you become less risk averse and less able to see things from other people's point of view. You effectively become highly disinhibited by power. And the reason that happens is because you're no longer co-regulated socially like us normal people are. You and I will sit in a meeting at work and, without realizing it, this is all happening subliminally. We're looking to each other to know when to laugh, when to smile, when to, grimace, when to look the other way. That's happening. That's a system that's happening beneath the conscious level at all times. Powerful people become untethered from that system because they can laugh whenever they goddamn want to. And that affects them really significantly over time because they don't have any feedback about the appropriateness of their responses. And also, it's about their subordinates who are incentivized to survive. And so inevitably, they cease to provide feedback that's negative. What they do is they provide feedback to their CEO that they calculate is the feedback that the CEO wants to hear. And that also is another contributor to them becoming more and more out of touch. So I worked in the Howard government, and I was very junior, right? I was one of the most junior shit kickers in the building, in the ministerial wing of the building. And even still, you would see John Howard had been prime minister for 11 and a half years, and he was one of those sort of quite plugged into the average person type of political leaders. And whether you liked him or didn't like him as a politician, you have to accept that he understood the sort of the mainstream working, families type of pressures that people felt. Well, at least he did at the beginning. Now, you got to remember, by his time of being prime minister for 11 and a half years, he would not have been to the petrol station to fill up his own car for more than a decade. He would not have caught a commercial flight in more than a decade because he had his own plane. He would not have been to the supermarket to buy milk or bread. Think of all the normal things that we do that regulate us. And to a lesser extent, but still to a significant extent, that's what happens to CEOs. They get chauffeured around. They have multiple secretaries and chiefs of staff, and everyone stands up when they walk into the room, and nobody ever keeps them waiting. So all of the normal things that we experience in life that keep us grounded, they are removed from the lives of the most powerful people, and that affects them. And you have to have sympathy for those people because it's not it would happen to you too if you're in that position. I don't think Alan Joyce or anyone else are the worst people in the world for losing touch with reality. It would happen to me as well. If I was the CEO of Qantas, then it would happen to you too.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you, Joe. I'm just conscious of time here. People can get the Chairman's Lounge book on Amazon. There's a link in the show notes. There's also a link to your Twitter profile.
And all good bookstores, Owen, not just Amazon. We support everyone.
Yes, I should say that.
I disclose I'm an Amazon shareholder, so I also support Amazon, but I love all booksellers. That's all.
Yeah, cool. Joe, I've got one question which I ask all guests that appear on the show really quickly.
No problem.
If you could go back in time and tell your younger self one thing, whether you're a staffer, whether you're in politics, whether you're even younger, just could be about anything, finance, money, business, investing, what would it be?
Well, the thing is, it wouldn't matter because I wouldn't have listened. The thing that really kisses me off is how true that expression is, that youth is wasted on the young. Because I was told all of the things that I wish I'd done. I was told, put aside X% of your salary and put it in an ETF, or put it in a compound asset, growing asset. I was told to make responsible decisions and study more and read more, and the 100 things that I was told to do, I did almost none of them. So I know that's a non-answer, but I just what I really wish I could do is to just not tell myself something, but actually go back in time, reach into my brain and rewire it so I would listen to good advice, to heaven's sake.
Yeah, I guess as the German proverb is that, we're too soon old. And that's the cliche, right? Well, Joe, the Chairman's Lounge is out in good bookstores. You might even pick it up at the airport while you're passing through. But mate, absolutely.
And read it on your Qantas flight. Just you'll be surprised. Most of the crew will give you a smile.
They probably give you a wink. So, mate, really appreciate your time. On behalf of the ASA and Rask, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Alan. Cheers.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.